So what you need to do is stand in the conviction of who you are, what you know, and then just put it out there. Because what your problem is that you think you need to deal with the price for the client. Nope, the price is for them to deal with. You just put it out there and allow them to wrestle with it. It's really looking at taking your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise, and using that to solve people's problems. I think that every entrepreneur's job is to improve the human condition. We happen to do it with information, guidance, frameworks, systems, processes that give people solutions, whether it's in health, whether it's in wealth, whether it's in parenting, relationships. And so if we can take what we know, package it up in a distinct way that makes it memorable, valuable, and something that's teachable, then what ends up happening is that we become an authority in a space. And that's what we get paid for. It's the one way. So I came out of the accounting profession, which has got the worst business model in the world. Let's swap hours for dollars. Like, you couldn't further commoditize anything. And I guess that's why they call us bean counters. Okay. Right. But it's the one way that you actually can leverage and scale your knowledge is through products, through processes, through offerings, and doing it that way. And that's, otherwise you're tied to the hours in the day and how many hours you want to work and your billable rate. And that's a horrible business model.
So when did you realize that, however, I mean, obviously being a valuation consultant, as hourly gigs go, that pays pretty well. You're probably getting paid 100, 200, 300, 500, hundreds of dollars per hour, I'm sure. But like you say, it's still fundamentally a time for money trade. So when did the light switch flip for you? That's like, okay, I have to create some leverage in this model.
So where this happened is, so when I first went out on my own, no one wanted to hire me because they said, you have no experience in the sense of litigation and testimony and all that stuff. So the attorneys were saying, we're not going to hire you. But I looked at them, I go, look, if you don't hire me, I'm never going to get the experience, which means that I never get hired, which means I got no future. So I thought about it. And like I said, this was pre-internet. I said, well, what's the next best thing to testimony experience so they can see, I can showcase my skills, talents, and knowledge. And so that's when I started speaking. So I started speaking all around the country. And every time I spoke, I would put a press release out. Every time I spoke, I would turn it into an article and I would send it to my contacts. So all of a sudden they see me a lot. And I created this perception in the marketplace that I had all this experience. But it was experience, but it wasn't the experience they're looking for, but they stopped asking.
Right.
So now here's what happened though, is I realized I had someone come to me and say, Mel, you could actually get paid to speak. And I go, I used to get in trouble when I spoke in class. You're telling me I get paid to speak? And I go, they said, yeah. And so I started to look at what I was doing. I was writing, I was doing workshops, I was training, I was speaking, I was writing articles. I was doing all of that stuff for free just so I could get the gig, the hourly gig, to get paid. And I said, well, what happens if I could take all of that work to get the gig and get paid along the road for the same knowledge, the same information, and then when I got the gig, it's the icing on top. So that's when I started to rethink everything I did and said, so now it was, how do I get paid speaking gigs? How do I get paid writing gigs? How do I get paid workshops? How do I get paid everything? So now I took the knowledge and said, let me get paid 3 or 4 times for the knowledge. So now I'm leveraging it beyond that swapping hours for dollars game. And so that was probably starting 2-3 years into my journey when someone had said, hey, go check out National Speakers Association. You can make money as a speaker and everything. And that's when I started to leverage it.
So I'm curious, did you ever have any personal trepidation about like authority positioning, or like, hey, I'm an expert, I'm the authority, I should get paid for what I know? Did you have any limiting beliefs around that you had to work through?
Absolutely. Usually it came at the moment where they said, well, what's this going to cost?
Right.
You know, and so I just, and it's still, you kind of look at it, but here's the challenge is that I spent a lot of time. This is the thing that people don't see. For me to be at the top of my game in the valuation arena, I spent a lot of time studying case law, studying all of the information late at night, reading, training, understanding, going back and forth with colleagues to make sure that we understood it. And then the other side of it is that I went to an association and said, I want to teach people to do what I do. So I went and started teaching because I said, what better way to make sure you know the knowledge? So I kept putting myself in a position to test my skill set and make sure that I knew it. The thing that I realized though in all of that is as long as I knew just a little bit more than the other person, the perception was that I knew vast amounts farther. And so I just needed to stay that much ahead of the other people and keep growing and keep going. But it still happened. I remember when I had a Beverly Hills attorney. He had me in a meeting with one of his clients, and it got to that pricing. Well, how much is this going to cost? And I look at the client and I hem and haw about the pricing, and then I put the price out. And the client got up and he left, and the attorney, he walks the client out. He says, "You stay right here." I go, "Okay." So I'm waiting in the boardroom, and the attorney comes back and he slams the door and he looks at me. He says, "If you ever hem and haw about your value and what you bring to the table, I'll never bring you a client again." He says, "You better understand something. You've got a journey that you have, you've got experience, you've got expertise." He said, "That's valuable." He said, "The other thing is that, so what you need to do is stand in the conviction of who you are, what you know, and then just put it out there, because what your problem is that you think you need to deal with the price for the client. Nope. The price is for them to deal with. You just put it out there and allow them to wrestle with it." And I go, "Gotcha." You know?
I will say, as somebody who has been the shepherd of probably between various education programs and courses and stuff, I've probably been involved in the journey of 200,000 people making the shift to become entrepreneurs. What you just said is the single biggest obstacle that they face is ultimately just believing that they're worth it. They want all these things. They want these things for their life. They want to command these prices. They want to have this lifestyle, even just at the lifestyle level. But deep down, if you don't believe you are worth it, if you don't believe you command it or you deserve it or that you've earned it, you will find infinitely creative ways to sabotage it.
Without a doubt. And I believe that whether you sabotage it overtly, the client or the person across from you, they feel it.
Yeah.
They feel the uncertainty, and they'll walk out and go, there was just something that didn't. Your client, before they buy from you, they want certainty. They want to feel comfortable. They want to know we got the right person. I trust him or her, and if you have that doubt, it sometimes comes through and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that your job, you have to be the most certain person in your universe. So many people are waiting for other people or market forces or whatever, some CNN news story to come on and be like, your idea is a good idea. You deserve it. You're a winner. You can have, like, how in this earth, if you don't have certainty in your own life, how could you in any way expect the outside world to have certainty about your life?
Yeah.
Why would anybody bet on someone who's not already convicted in betting on themselves?
Without a doubt. I totally agree. And we got to stop searching for permission.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. And there's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. I see a sign behind you. I think you just launched a show of your own, right?
We did. I mean, Apple did whatever they could to stand in the way, but we got it launched, and we've got called the Affluent Entrepreneur Show. So it's a joy. It's kind of my passion project.
Wait, so you're saying that Apple, you know, big $1 trillion company that they are, they're having some kind of technical challenge that's interfering with your plans?
They proudly announced on April 22nd this brand new podcast platform, which after about a couple of weeks completely went down. I mean, you were not able to submit a new show or anything. And here's the worst part: you can't even get any information from them. You send a support ticket in, they don't respond. It took 3-4 days for them to respond. And basically, what I got from them was, "Don't call us, we'll call you. We got all the information we need." So it's like, yeah, there's a lesson in how not to do customer service.
So I mean, the obvious thing to do then for you would just be to quit and abandon all your plans and just take your ball and go home, right? Why didn't you do that?
Well, so interesting. The way I looked at it initially, I thought, all right, do we delay? Do we wait? But then I realized this is not an hour problem. This is not a day problem. It's a week's problem. And so the only thing that we started looking at, I said, well, wait, what is our purpose here? Why are we doing this? And was it really to hit the charts and do all of that? Or was it really to serve? And once I got past that, I said, then it's time to lean in. You know, we're able to get the show out by rebranding an older show. The big problem that we have right now with them is that the artwork, sometimes it updates for people, sometimes it doesn't. But I said, you know what? Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a podcast by its cover. The gold and the values on the inside, the episodes are there. Let's go after it. Let's go serve. That's the purpose. And that's what we started to do instead.
And we all know that in time it'll resolve. And my question was, I'm sure you caught, very tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of my audience is new aspiring entrepreneurs, people that are making a pivot, a lot of times a career pivot or just a life pivot, starting a business. And I want them to hear that basically go ahead and get used to stuff like this. That you probably will never have a day where something doesn't go wrong. And if you're going to take your ball and go home, you should just go ahead and do it now, because you know, it's going to be like that every day.
I totally agree with you. It is part of the journey. And if it's something that stresses you out, I mean, it doesn't not stress you out, but if it's something that debilitates you, then you're probably on the wrong journey.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So you're a big entrepreneurial, I don't know, evangelist or advocate or what you would call it. I mean, you beat the drum of what becoming an entrepreneur can do for a person's life, right? Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, if you know, here we're starting off talking about the stress and the problems, like what's the payoff that makes it worth enduring those things?
For me, so I actually started my entrepreneurial journey at age 11. I started doing, believe it or not, magic shows for kids' birthday parties, half-hour show at age 11, getting paid $50 for a half an hour. Now we're talking 1972. Now you know how old I am, but so
that was good money.
That was really good money.
Kid, yeah.
And that was the thing that really kind of lit the fire. I go, wait a second. I took something I loved doing and I went out and they're paying me to do what I love doing. And I get to see that I'm having an impact on their lives. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're enjoying it. I go, this is a great way to make money. In the meantime, my dad, wonderful parents, white collar worker, engineer, chemical plastics engineer, carpooled, 70 miles to work each and every day, working hard and everything. I'm going, and I could see the tiredness in his eyes and not necessarily the passion. I thought, I got to do something different. And I think I think the possibility with entrepreneurship is that we get to be able to allow our passions to come to life when we understand how to create value with our passions in other people's worlds. And I think that's a huge thing, because I talk about wealth, and I said wealth isn't a place we want to be necessarily. It's the richness, the feeling, the experiences that are more important than just the dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, experiences, gosh, I think about, outside of my family, obviously that's kind of the richest experience in my life. But outside of that, all the really cool stuff that's happened to me has been in either, true entrepreneurship, like founding a company, growing a company, or at the very least freelance work. That's where all the best things that have happened to me have happened to me. Even meeting my wife was at a conference for an entrepreneurial thing. I mean,
I met my wife leaving a conference at the airport.
No,
Same
really?
thing. Yeah. Yeah. And you
Okay.
think about it, people asked, I did a Tony Robbins mastermind. It was like $60,000. And then they turn around and someone said, was it worth it? And I go, well, it depends on how you look at it. But the people I met along that journey that started with that mastermind are the things that led me to be in that airport to meet the woman of my dreams. And I think aside from the monetary things, my life is a whole lot richer because I took a chance. I invested in myself and the people that came along in that journey that helped me do that. So I totally agree.
So, you raise a good question, or a good, talking point. Let's say you spent $60,000 to be a part of a mastermind.
Yeah.
I've spent multiple six figures on, let's call it, various forms of self-education, right? Courses, masterminds, attending live events, paying to play, paying to participate in live events, you name it. I've probably spent $250,000 on coaches and whatever. A lot of people really think that stuff is nuts.
Yeah.
They think we're suckers. They think the money just burns a hole in our pocket. What's your, I mean, I already know your take because we're of a like mind, but can you speak more to why that is money well spent, not money pissed away?
So I actually think that it depends on what you do. I was actually just on another interview, and we had similar conversations that I could have spent the money, and I've spent probably the same as you in all these different courses and programs.
Mm-hmm.
And if I didn't show up, I pissed away the money. If I didn't get involved, if I didn't make things happen, if I didn't network, if I didn't execute, then I pissed away the money. And it was window dressing, saying, oh, I'm doing this, and nothing's going to make us successful except our effort, our execution, our diligence, our persistence. And so I look at it, and part of me, it's my nature. I go, well, if I'm spending this money, I'm gonna squeeze every bit of value out of it that I possibly can. And so to me, going into it, I was going into it with the mindset of, how do I make sure that I get 10 or 20 or 50 times my investment back by making sure that I give it my all and take the most away from it from a growth standpoint. And let's face it, if we become better people in that process, if I become a better husband, a better father, I'm going to be a granddad, so a better granddad, then there's some things that we can't measure in monetary terms.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I concur. I think about the very first event that I went to. I met, and I was broke. I had to scrounge up $2,000 for the flight and the hotel. And there was no real justifiable argument for why it was a good idea for Jeff Lerner to go to that event monetarily, or even just functionally as a liver of life. But, I met the man that would introduce me to his daughter, who's now my wife, at that event. And he did so at a future event, by the way. It was actually his event. I met another guy who was my coach, who 10 years later would be my coach at the time, who kind of helped me come up with the plan to launch my current company, Entre Institute, which is by far the most successful venture I've ever had. I had 2 other guys at the event that I ended up starting a company with at a different time. I had another guy that I ended up getting about a $300,000 consulting gig from, all at my very first event.
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
But you're right. It's because I didn't just show up and go, okay, I'm here. I spent the money. Let me wait for this to change me.
Yeah.
You got to really tear into it.
Well, I think, there's those that want to be on the sideline of life, and there's those that want to be on the field of life. And I think that we can sit back and allow life to happen to us, or we can turn around and make life happen for us. And I think that's how we get the most out of it.
So, yeah, I mean, like I said, we're of a like mind. I'm sure we're going to be very agreeable this whole time, just agreeing with each other left and right. But, so let me ask this, you got the entrepreneurial bug really young.
Yeah.
But, you had, I don't know if it was the good judgment or the time to kill or what, but you decided, hey, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to get an accounting degree.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was probably more like the expectations of parents.
Okay. Right.
That, because listen, coming from a nice Jewish family, they wanted me to be a doctor. So at first I was going to be a doctor. And then I realized I actually don't like the sight of blood. So I said, well, maybe I do the dentist thing. And I go, I don't want to play with someone's teeth. So I changed my major twice. And then someone said, well, get an accounting degree, because at least it's an overall business degree. And that'll, so I said, okay. And so that's literally how I ended up in the accounting area. And it didn't take me long. I got my CPA license. I passed the exam while I was still in college. And I went to one of the large consulting firms in downtown Los Angeles, and it didn't take me too long. I was on fast track to partnership, but really in the middle of that, it was in that I said, this is not the game I want to play. I'm in big corporate America. I'm working long hours. I'm unappreciated. I don't feel like I'm having the impact. And that's when I kind of gave back and said, how do I take the skills, the talents, the strengths, the things that I currently have and I want to grow into, and have a bigger role to play, a bigger impact. And I went back to doing things on my own. I went to a firm and became a partner, and then started to do things on my own. Yeah.
So you were was it what, you don't have to say where it was, but was it one of the was it the big 5 or big 4?
Yeah, it was one of the big 5s. It was Pete Marwick before they merged with KPMG. And, okay. And then I left right after the merger, after 5.5 years with them.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, I mean, obviously I assume working on really big accounts, really big clients.
Yeah, I was. And a lot of them weren't, initially they were in the areas that I said, I don't see a future. They had me on insurance companies, and like going, what do I want to do with Amundsen Insurance? I mean, there's no future there unless I'm going to become a CFO or a controller and everything. And so I was fortunate, the one blessing there. And I will say that for me, the education and experience I got was immeasurable. It was phenomenal, because shortly after that experience, I was able to transfer into their merger and acquisition group. So that's when I started to get into consulting, valuing businesses, buying and selling businesses, strategic planning, and which is what has served me since then. So I had a really good educational process, but still I was a small cog in a big wheel. And I said, how do I impact more lives? How do I know that I'm making a difference?
Yeah, it's funny, as somebody who's been kind of a rogue outsider his whole life and career. I mean, I was a jazz musician, and then I've been was a entrepreneur, starting things left and right, failing left and finally I got some things to work. And now for the last 12 years, roughly, I've had a string of, good things, but I've never had any of that formal training. Like I never got to be on the inside of a meeting at KPMG going over a, $5 billion P&L. And I actually think that sounds awesome. like so instructive. But to your point, would I want to do it for 40 years?
Yeah.
No, but just to be in that room, I feel like, you know, I hear you saying there's a part of it you really appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there definitely was. I did have a good mentor while I was in college who kind of kept coached me through and said, go there, get the education. So he already planted that seed, get the experience. But it's to watch them navigate, to negotiate. I mean, I do a lot of negotiating now, mediating now. And a lot of the lessons I learned was through some of the people that guided me there. You know, at the firm, one of the beautiful things that they did do is that when you came into the firm, they assigned you a mentoring partner and a mentoring manager. So you had these two higher up folks that kind of guided your career and were your kind of confidants as you were going through. And I was fortunate to get some really good ones that took me under their wing and wanted to really see me grow, which pissed them off when I left. But
Right.
at the same time, I did have a fortunate journey there.
What would you say are some of the, and by the way, I'm totally asking because I want to learn vicariously because I'll never get to be in those rooms.
That's all right.
What would you say are maybe one or two of the biggest lessons that you took from that part of your career?
The interesting thing for me was I came into this as an accounting major. All right. Columns and rows, numbers, formulas, mathematics. That wasn't the most important skill. Communication was. That what I had to do, I remember me writing my very first valuation report, and I gave it to the partner on a Friday. I came in on a Monday saying, "Do you get a chance to read the report?" And she said, "Yeah." And she threw it at me. She said, "It's a piece of junk." And she said, "You need to learn how to write and you need to learn how to communicate." She goes, "I want you to go get White and Strunk's book. And I want you to read it cover to cover. Then I want you to read it cover to cover again. And I want you to start doing some other things." And I was pissed, but you know what? She was right. The greatest skill we could nurture is our ability to communicate. And I didn't understand that. I thought if I understood the math and I did the math, it would make sense. But the math is meaningless if I can't communicate the mission, if I can't communicate the message to really make it happen. So I think that was probably the biggest lesson, is this idea that that communication is the primary skill that we need to develop in the entrepreneur space, in the business space.
You said Strunk and White, and if anybody's watching on YouTube, they saw that I was just terribly looking over my shoulder. I think I actually have the Elements of Style on this bookshelf somewhere.
Yep.
Because I'm a big fan of written and spoken word. I'm with you. Well, I think Tony Robbins actually has a quote. He says maybe it wasn't Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins and Einstein are like the two guys we just attribute quotes to, them and like Mark Twain. But
there you go.
Abraham Lincoln. But anyway, somebody said the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your communication. And in fact, I literally said that yesterday on a video that I was shooting for a part of our process. I said those exact words because we have a whole event, 3-day event in our ecosystem that really hones in on mastering communication.
It's huge. And you think about it in relationships and parenting and business and everything we do. If we can up-level our ability to communicate, just the use of language. I started to get intrigued and fascinated with the use of language and like what it could do, and how it could disempower, it could empower, it could aggravate, it could frustrate. There's so much. And with a lot of the speaking that I do, you start to realize the importance of that. So I remember telling my son's now 31 years old, and telling him, I said, your greatest skill is your ability to communicate, nurture it, care for it, grow it. And, he's 31, has got a wife of 27, and they've got their own business. They're got a multi-million-dollar net worth. They're doing it right, expecting their first child. But, a lot of it had to do with him going through and understanding how to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is the ultimate, honestly, it's the ultimate door opening skill. I've had, it's something I've been really intentional about cultivating in my life. I've read my whole childhood, wanted to be a writer for a while. And I've just always been really, really intimately in love with language and,
Yeah.
you know, semantics. And I love looking up what word origins, etymologies and stuff. And I swear there are things that I've been able to pull off in my life that are punching way above my weight class, because I can hold a conversation with people that are above my weight class.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I tell people, I go, if you don't think I can sell, I said, just look at my wife. Because let me tell you,
Yeah.
way above my weight class.
Yeah. I'm in that same boat, honestly, man. And actually, I have to say, for anybody on YouTube and maybe for you, Mel, if you just saw my arm,
Yeah.
you might have been like, what's Jeff doing to himself? No, I had a cat lose its mind on my hand and wrist, and it's just a sweet little cat. And I was going to pet it on its chin, what it likes. And for some reason it was just having a bad day. You know, it's like those, what was that show with the tiger, that big Netflix documentary? Did you see that?
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? You
Yeah.
know how like one day the tiger will just freak out?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really bad day when it's a tiger. In my case, it was just a house cat, but anyways. Okay. So apropos of nothing. All right. So you get the itch and you say, okay, I need to live a self-determined life, and you strike out from corporate America. And where did that journey take you as far as becoming an entrepreneur?
So it first took me into a place of reflection of what was important, what was I going to do, where was I going to spend my time. I literally took off and went to Japan for 5 months, trained in the martial arts twice a day while I was trying to figure it out. Then it brought me back to looking and saying, all right, let's go back. I love the valuation because we're building value in businesses. We're doing that kind of work and the consulting. And so that's what I started doing, is building at that time, I didn't realize it, but building my first expert business, my first personal brand,
right,
as a valuation expert, as a consultant to help people with their businesses. And that's kind of where it started from, is building that, pre-internet, pre-opt-in pages, pre all of that stuff,
right.
is what we were doing.
So when was this?
Talking about 1989.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then, so valuation, and how long did you do that?
I still actually, here's the interesting thing for those people that are just starting out trying to build in the knowledge space, in the wisdom space, and they're trying to figure this thing out. I started that journey back in 89, 90 to build this practice. The mistake that I think we make in this knowledge business is we think that marketing is there for the transactions. It's not. It's there for the positioning. And I mean it in this way. That same business, I still do valuations today. I still get called for valuations, but they're higher level, they're higher price, they're premium dollar. I have no website. I have no marketing. I have no business cards. I don't do any meetings, and I haven't done them for a decade. Okay. And the reason for it is all the work that I did before to position myself as the go-to person in that industry still exists today. I still get calls today. And so the seeds that we plant as experts, as authorities in our field, that maybe you're sitting back saying, I don't have a lot of followers, I don't have this. I did this when there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't these ads. The dedication to your craft is going to be core and key to elevating your expertise, creating positioning that transcends time and your marketing.
You know, when I was reading about your stuff, I came across a really interesting story that I would love you to share more about.
Yeah.
And I know that I mentioned, and you told me you're a cancer survivor, obviously. Yep. But I'm guessing this might've happened before. Actually, I think I'm mixing up my stories, but there was some story. I don't think it's actually had anything to do with cancer, although I would love to talk about battling cancer. But there was some incident in your life where I think your kid drew a picture of you.
Yeah, this was,
and it like careened your whole life in a different direction.
Yeah, it did. So I was a single full-time dad. Started raising my son as a single dad at age 5.5. That happened to be the same year. So when I came back from Japan, went into a small firm, started doing the valuation, started to build the practice. Um, and that same year that I became a single full-time dad, my partners kind of pushed me out of the firm. They said, "You're going a different direction." They had the in the box thinking of CPAs, and they couldn't see the vision for what I was doing. And so they pushed me out of the firm with no work, no client backlog, no cash flow. And here I was, 300,000 in debt because I just bought a house. The greatest gift in the world is in front of me, that, being a dad. And I'm trying to figure out how do you keep the roof on your head. And so what I did is what most entrepreneurs do. I got on the treadmill. I started running. I started working. I started putting my head down. I started doing the things that I needed to do to bring the clients in, to get the cash flow. And it started to work. All of a sudden I'm going, "Hey kid, man, this is going to work. We're going to be okay. Roof's going to stay over the head." And then he comes running in from school one day, and he was about 6 years old at the time. And he says, Daddy, I drew a picture of you at school today." And so I knelt down, and he hands me this picture, and it was in blue felt tip pen. Here I was standing in front of 2 computer screens with a phone in each ear and another phone on the desk ringing. And in a moment, I looked at this and I said, "Wow, he doesn't see me as a dad. He sees me as a workaholic. He doesn't see me having fun. We're not having fun. We're not playing ball. We're not at Disneyland. We're not doing any of that. He sees me in front of computer screens." And it was then when I said, I got to figure out how to do business differently, how to do money differently, how to do all of this differently, because it's easy for me to look at him and say, "Hey kid, this is for us. This is how we're going to keep the roof over. This is how we can go to Disney. This is how we can do the things we want to do." But we weren't doing the things we want to do. He didn't care about my profits. He cared about my presence. He cared about the fact that I was there. And that was the aha where I realized this concept of work-life balance is a myth. It has nothing to do with balance, because balance insinuates that we've got things on both ends. It's got to do with harmony and how we put it together so it all integrates and works together as one. And that's where I started to look at it and say, how do we create something that allows us the ability to serve the greatest gifts of our lives? In my case at that time was fatherhood, but to still live our dreams, which I wanted to have an impact on people. I wanted to help entrepreneurs. And so you had to look at business differently, and know that the why of my business, the values, the meaning, had to be the driver to the decisions in my business, the model and the mechanics.
I want to restate what you just said, because it was pretty powerful for me, that it's not about work-life balance, but if I'm paraphrasing, but it's about work-life harmony.
Yeah.
In other words, there's not two things on either end of a seesaw that you're trying to balance. It's actually about pulling them together into an integrated center.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And man, that is so what I don't want to pretend that I was smart enough to do it intentionally. It's just kind of the groove I have found in the last several years.
Yeah.
Where it's all an outgrowth of one thing. It might be different appendages, but they're part of the same body. And it is the best existence in the world, man, where there's no there's really not such a seam between your work and your family, or your work and your personal life. It's just, you're doing fulfilling, rewarding things. And
I'm with you 100% on this. I think you're so right, because otherwise we're living in two or three or four different identities during a day. How do we reconcile that? That's stressful.
Yeah. I remember growing up, I had a girlfriend in high school, and her dad was always real, he was always real guarded, real reserved. He wasn't mean. He just was not very present when I would go to their house. And I remember talking to her one time, and she said, "Yeah, he used to be really warm and connected with the family, but he couldn't do his job." And so he he went through this period where he had to pick his identity. And in order to actually provide for us as a family, he had to choose his work identity, but it was too exhausting for him to toggle back and forth.
Yeah.
So now he's just that guy all the time, which means that when he's home, he's basically sitting on the couch reading a book related to his work.
Yeah.
And it was like, you know, I don't know that it hit me then like it would now that I have my own kids, but like, whoa, seriously? Like we really have to live that binary? I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's actually how most people kind of live.
They do. And the answer is no. The answer to your question is the rhetorical question was no, we don't have to live that binary. You're a living proof of that.
Well, and so are you. So why don't you talk about it? I mean, you know, the Affluence Blueprint, the Thoughtpreneur Academy formula, like you've got all these methodologies that I get the sense are all sort of pointed in that direction of how to create a life that where the way to be the best at your work is to be the best version of yourself, not some different spin on yourself or something. So what's your, do you have, I mean, how do you kind of counsel the average person? Like, look, you and I are knowledge-based influencers on the internet. Like we have this kind of happy, I mean, what to the outside probably seems like this happy-go-lucky, easy thing, although you and I both know it's far from that. But to the guy who's, look, man, I clock in at 8 o'clock in the morning at the, you know, for my shift, and my shift lead or my foreman is on my butt, and, you know, he's driving me, and then I got to go home. Like that guy, his life is kind of binary by, you know, structure.
Yeah.
How do you approach somebody like that and say, listen, let me help you see your life a different way?
I think the first thing is, and I learned this, you know, this whole idea of, you know, motivational speaking and all that stuff. I don't think we can motivate anyone. I had a martial arts studio for 11 years, and I had an assistant there that was phenomenal with the children. But when it came to managing the studio, I gave him the tools, I gave him the training, I gave him access to whatever resources he wanted. He just didn't have the desire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the first thing is to really, if they can really tap into their desire, you know, but I think before that might be, especially in today's environment, is they need to see that it's even possible for them. You know, they may desire it, but if they don't believe that there's any possibility for them to reach it, then they're not even going to try. They're just going to resolve themselves and dissolve themselves into this state of being and be okay with it. And that complacency is horrible. It's horrible. And that's probably the first thing that we would do is really start to dig in and say, where's that desire? How do we find that desire? How do we light the fire back in that possibility so we can see it? It may be distant, and it may be a distant flame, but to bring that back, you know, the thing that's standing in our way between where we want to be and where we are today is, you know, either knowledge, people, or attitude. And I think that we can solve a lot of those things. And when we understand that it's simply figuring out, what don't I know, who the people that are standing in my way that I need to move aside, or the people that I need to put in my path to help me, and how do I need to change my head game, then what else is there?
You know, I think you hit on probably the least utilized, but arguably most important aspect of change, which is getting new people in your sphere. And you're right, to that guy or gal, or, you know, to anybody who's trying to size up their life from within their life, and they're looking at what they have to work with and going, how do I be creative with what I have to work with? And how would I create this new possibility for my life or go a different direction? The reality is, you may actually be right that based on your world as it stands right now, you don't have the possibilities that you would want, but you can always change your world by changing who's in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, we're not saying to people, hey, there may be some people you need to axe out of your life. But by and large, not everyone is equal in our lives. I think of them as concentric circles, and there's people in the inner circle. There's people in outer circle, and believe it or not, your family might actually not be in the inner circle, and it's not offensive to them. It's just the position they are in, the influence that they have in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been blessed with some amazing people in my life. And I've also had those that I've had to cut ties with because I realized they would be an anchor.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Amen. I just encourage anyone who, because, maybe it's my bias, my experiential bias in the world is I deal with so many people that are wanting to pivot into entrepreneurship because the non-entrepreneur, the non-entrepreneur life has frustrated them, or else clearly they wouldn't be seeking the alternative. And so often that's just what it comes down to. I mean, I get this anecdotally from our advisors. I get it from our specialists. I get it from our coaches. We have multiple strata of people in Entre that work directly with the students. And as often as not, the answer is always, you gotta get some new people in your life, man.
Yeah.
You are the accumulation, the aggregation of your influences, your spiritual, emotional, metaphysical, psychological influences. You can't not be that. It's impossible to not be the product of your influences.
And this kind of goes back to one of your original questions about, paying for coaching, mentors, mastermind, those kinds of things, because sometimes those people in our lives are going to be colleagues, friends that are uncompensated monetarily, and it's mutual, and sometimes it's compensated, but we need to be intentional in curating what's coming in, what's sitting in, and what we're being influenced by.
Yeah. I mentioned how at that first event, I met a guy who was later my coach when I hatched the plan to start the business I have now. He was my friend the whole time. I mean, he's been my friend for the last 10 years. And there was a point where I was leaning on him so much because he's a brilliant marketer and entrepreneur. And I was like leaning on him so much. I was like, dude, I actually feel like I'm starting to abuse our friendship. Like I'm taking advantage of you. I know he's not a coach, but I said, can I pay you for coaching? Even though we're like really good friends, I just temporarily, I want to be able to lean on you in a way that would be imbalanced in the context of a friendship. So for the next year, I want to pay you and you can be my coach. And then when we're done, we'll just go back to being friends. and it was so important. When I started paying him, it changed the dynamic of the relationship where I willingly stepped into the role of pupil, even though it was my buddy, because I had an agenda, I had an objective, and I knew he could help me get there. And it worked great. And now we're just friends again, right? It's great. But you're right, man. Being really intentional about not only which relationships you have in your life, but about how you orchestrate those relationships, how you engineer them to really get what you need. And it's always, Stephen Covey's 7 habits. One, I think the very first one is seek win-win. It's okay to want to win in a relationship.
Without a doubt.
It's not a zero-sum game. The other person doesn't have to lose.
I totally agree. It's not a zero-sum game.
But you got to be intentional about it. And that's where I find so many people sort of accept relationship dynamics by default instead of by design.
Well, it'd be an interesting question for everyone to ask themselves. When's the last time I searched out a very specific strategic relationship that would serve me in my life?
Yeah.
Searched out.
Right.
Because
and created it intentionally in the way that I needed it to function.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's powerful. It's powerful when what's your answer? Like, would you say that's your primary methodology for creating relationships is with great intentionality, or are you just like the rest of us where, we could all do better?
Well, I think I can do better. First off, I'm not really good at asking for help, which is that, but I'm the first one that offers help. I'm the first one to step up and do things. So I usually come from a place of service. I find people that we have consistent values. I see that they're in places where I want to be, and I'll find ways to serve their mission. And in the process, I learn and I grow and we cement I've got some amazing friends in this business for the years that I've been in it. Brendan Richard, he officiated my son's wedding. I mean, we're dear friends. I'm with him backstage at all the events, and I'm announcing, I'm speaking and all that. Some of all the top ones. And a lot of it just came out of the love of the industry, what they were doing, the realization that we're actually all making a difference in this space, and seeing how I could serve.
Hmm. Very cool. Very cool. So I know that our time is short, and I really want to
Yeah.
ask you if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Um, you had a battle with cancer fairly recently, from what I understand.
June of 2019. And this kind of, it'll bring a full circle to the whole Apple conversation when we talk about what happens to us as entrepreneurs in life. Is that
Mhm.
so? I was literally masterminding with some of the top people. I just finished a multi six-figure launch. Traveling around the world, speaking on some of the largest stages, working with people that are $100 million, billion-dollar entrepreneurs in a mastermind. And I'm flying back on a G5. We're having a great time. Life is good. 2 weeks after that, getting off that plane here in Orange County, I found myself in a hospital bed where the doctors looked at me and said, "There's a 5 centimeter tumor in your bladder, and we need to take it out. And the problem is that where it's at, you might lose your prostate, and we might have to put a tube in and a bag in for the kidney. And if it's really bad, you lose your bladder." And I'm like, what the hell's life like without a bladder? I mean, my whole life got turned upside down in an instant. And they went in, and for me, it turned out to be a 7.5 centimeter tumor. It took them 6 hours to take it out. I've had uh, 3 surgeries, 4 tumors, 33 treatments over the last 2 years. And I can thankfully say that we just had a scope just a few weeks ago, passing the 1 year milestone. I'm completely clear, clean, and done. We beat that bad boy down twice in the last 2 years, and I'm good and I feel great. But the lesson, the thing that came out of this is that I knew when that happened that I had no idea that when Jeremy was 6 years old and he drew that picture for me and I changed the way I did business, how it would prepare me for life later on, that I had to do business differently to be there as his dad. When this came upon me, I knew that I had to pull myself away from the business. I knew that I had to get myself totally focused on healing and getting myself healthy again. But I knew I would have to fight the cancer, uh, mentally, medically, emotionally, physically, through all of that. But I didn't have to fight the cancer financially. And that took a layer of stress off. And so for me, that's why the show's been birthed. That's why so much has come on, is the realization that even with the pandemic falling on the cancer, so many people are out there trying to build a life, but they're not doing it in a way that when life happens, whether it's cancer, relationships, something else, when life happens, they're not prepared. And that's the thing that I'm trying to solve. And I think too often we believe that financial independence isn't in the cards. Here's my belief: financial independence is a birthright, and it's our job to figure out how to claim it. And when we understand the simplicity of the money game and the wealth game and the business game, not saying that it's easy, I'm just saying that it's simple. It doesn't take rocket scientist type of thinking to do it. Then we can build a life that allows you to have the peace of mind, the richness of life, and the impact and freedom you want. And that's kind of in a nutshell. But this struggle with cancer was huge because I knew that at that time, staring mortality in its face, that my days are numbered. Hopefully it's a lot big number,
Mhm.
but they're numbered, which means that gratitude has to go up. The things that I say yes to have to be really discerning and mean something. Because if I'm going to say yes, what I'm saying, and I think we all need to think this way, is that when we say yes to something, we're handing a slice of our life away. It's a slice we'll never ever get back. You all that are listening, you all that are watching, you'll never get this slice back. My job, if I'm going to say yes to it, is and honor you and your life, is to make sure that I bring everything I have to that moment and give you everything I possibly could in that moment. And if I don't feel comfortable doing that, then I shouldn't have said yes in the first place. And that's the thing that I think started to come about, is to live fully, completely committed to everything that means something in our life for the days that we have.
You talked about, and I appreciate you saying that, and to the audience, I think they feel it, that you're trying to make it have been a wise decision to say yes to watching this episode or listening to this episode. But you mentioned the financial aspect, that at least that was one part of the situation that didn't have to be nearly a struggle that it is, frankly, for most people that go through a life-threatening illness or something that requires them to step away from work, or, just disrupts their financial merry-go-round. I have long preached many times to some hostility in response, because they don't want to hear it, that all the figures, all the formulas that are conventionally thrown around in this country and I guess in the world for retirement and financial security, that they're all euphemistically watered down for people to not make people feel as far from financial security as they probably really are. I mean, the average 60-year-old in this country, I think, has something like $90,000 in their retirement account. And I would argue that anything under 10 million is a liability. I mean, and Merrill Lynch will tell you, no, it's 1.2. And Charles Schwab will say, no, it's 1.8. And I would say, no, you're all idiots. It's 10. And because how long are you planning to live? What kind of life do you want to have? And is anything unexpected going to happen?
Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head. I think that we don't think about it. I don't know that we want to think about it, because we're thinking about end of life planning in a sense. But if we don't think about it, $90,000 in a retirement account at 60, after you pay taxes, you might end up with 60 grand, probably more like 50 grand. And so where does that take you? Where does a medical bill take you at that point? Bottom line is, if you don't do it for yourself, do it for your children. Don't become a burden to your children. Now here's the other side. To defend where we're at, we have industrial age thinking in this country that we haven't gotten away from. We came from a system where most companies, the first pension plan was created, public pension plan was built around the military pension plan, was American Express in the late 1800s. And we came out of this industrial age where you dedicate your life in service to a company for a career, and then they say, we'll give you a pension. And the pension was a lifetime income. Right. Now, then they came back and they turned around and say, oh, we're going to swap that out. And we're going to give you something called a 401k, an IRA, this and that. We mistakenly got sold a bill of goods thinking that is a lifetime income. It's not. It's a lump sum. And if that lump sum isn't large enough, it's not enough to give you the lifetime income to survive on. And then we tell them, hey, here's what you do. You save until you're done and you're ready to retire. And then you reduce your lifestyle and you spend, and then you pray that your life doesn't outlast your money. That's a gambler's game. And it's not a game I want to take. Now, that doesn't mean that it's easy. Like I said, it's simple, but it's not easy. Most people don't have money problems in this country. They have behavior problems. And the behaviors that they bring to the table are driven by the marketing, by the media, by the social media, by comparing yourself to the Joneses, by sitting back and not having the guts to say, no, this is what success looks like for me, and I will not compromise on anything less, and build it. The idea here is this. When Jeremy drew that picture of me, I realized I needed not financial freedom. I needed financial liberation. I needed to build something that allowed me to know that I could survive in perpetuity if that happened. And the only way to do that is to not follow the traditional thought process of save and then spend it down and hope your life doesn't outlast it. You need to build a machine so you can flip the switch so the cash flow out of the machine carries you for however long you have. And that's what we did when I got cancer, is that we turned around and I said, I'm going to reduce the income from my active businesses. So I need to replace the income. And then we aren't selling stuff. We're not downsizing. We're not selling the house. We're not selling my wife's shoes. It would have been worse than cancer if I did that. Mm-hmm. And so we turned around and we flipped the switch on the machine. Instead of that money going back into the machine to grow the machine bigger, it came out and supported our lifestyle. Now when we're going back into the game, we shut the machine off. The machine is now reinvesting. And I'm putting myself back into the business. But never once did we reduce our lifestyle, and never once did I have to sit back and go, oh my God, how long is this going to last?
Yeah.
Now that's not easy to do. And that takes a bigger number like you're talking about. But here's the deal. I get it. If you're 50 years old, or I'm going to be 60 this year, it's a different game, and we got to push really hard at those ages to try and make this happen. But if we can get our kids, if we can get our youth to start understanding this at 20, at 21, it's easy for them. My son's 31, his wife's 27. They've got 3 homes already, and they've got a multi-million-dollar net worth. It's principles that work. Fundamental truths. A principle is actually a system of behaviors. You put the right behaviors together, it'll get you the right results. We just haven't been taught that. And now we need to teach it. And that's kind of what's been driving me.
And myself as well. That's why I got in. I sold my agency 3 years ago and decided to go into the education business, because I felt like the world needed business and financial and entrepreneurial education more than it needed another digital agency.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Cool. Well, Mel, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful for the time. I'm actually, if I'm not grateful for anything, it's that we have to end. I actually wish we were talking, because this has been wonderful. From one Jewish boy to another, man. Thanks for coming on the show. This has been fantastic. Tell the world how they can go get more Mel Abraham goodness.
Well, gosh, couple places. First things first, I'd love to have you get part of the show. So the Affluent Entrepreneur Show, you can go to melabraham.com/show live. And then, hit me up on DMs or on Facebook, Mel Abraham 9 on the DM on Instagram. And, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to be part of that journey and to help. And it's kind of good to be back.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
So when I created the EQRP, it's the Enhanced Qualified Retirement Plan. That was a way for people to take their IRAs and 401ks and just be able to control it.